Welcome to Uncomfortable Growth Uncut, where we celebrate those who defy fear, embrace growth, and live without regret. In a world that celebrates perfection, we rarely hear about the challenges, fears, and crossroads that successful leaders grapple with across work and life. Uncomfortable Growth Uncut shines a light on their personal story and the critical human skills we all need today to turn trials into triumph. Welcome everyone to another episode of Uncomfortable Growth Uncut. Today I'm with the fabulous Darren Woolley, who I've known for a really long time. I'm saying decades, Darren, but I don't want to age us, so I'm saying decades. Who is the founder and CEO of Trinity P3, which is a marketing and management consultancy. So welcome, Darren. It's lovely to have you here.
Thanks, Rowena, and thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, well, I know so many people have amazing stories, and I'm really keen to learn yours. So what is your uncomfortable growth story that you'd like to share with us today, Darren?
Well, I think, everyone at some stage during their teenage years starts thinking about what their life career is going to be. And I was very much being pushed into by my teachers, by my family, to do science because I was particularly good at maths and science, but not that good at English, ironically. And so I ended up doing a science degree at RMIT in Melbourne called Medical Laboratory Science, which sent me on a path of working in medical research.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are often ask me, well, how did you end up in advertising when you started out in medical research? And I have to say it's uncomfortable growth. It was a process, but it taught me a huge amount about, that saying that when men make plans, God laughs.
Yes,
That we
yes.
can make all these plans, but in many ways, your life ends up becoming just following a path. And
Yeah.
it's taught me to be, to continue to be curious and to
Uh-huh.
also take risks, and try
Yeah.
things that are well outside your comfort zone because sometimes
Yeah.
amazing things happen.
Absolutely. So, okay, that's fascinating because medical research and science, and even that degree you mentioned, that sounds quite serious and very obviously analytical. So, tell me, were you excited to do your degree in the sciences? Was that something that you wanted, or were there kind of other suggestive forces at work?
Well, so here's the sad truth. That was my
Uh-huh.
fourth preference at the end of year 12. You had to put in your
Yeah.
preferences for university. I
Yeah.
wanted medicine, and something else, and ended up with the fourth option because, my ATAR, I think they call it now, but my score just wasn't high enough for medicine.
Uh-huh.
So I ended
Uh-huh.
up getting into this course and I went, well, it's sort of adjacent to science. You work in medical research. I had
Yeah.
to explain to people all the time with my Bachelor of Applied Science, it wasn't a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Applied Science, um, that no, I wasn't a doctor, even though I worked in a hospital. I
Um,
would use, there was a show called Quincy ME
oh,
on
I remember Quincy Emmy.
last
Yeah.
century. Yeah. And I'd say, I'm not Quincy, I'm Sam, the
Uh-huh.
sidekick that does all the tests. That was my job. I worked for
Right.
a doctor, Dr. Xenia Dennett, who
Uh-huh.
was my boss. And I would do all the tests and things to fulfill our research
Right,
projects.
right. And did you enjoy that? Were you happy in that job?
I love the community of working at the Royal Children's Hospital because our laboratory was at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, which is an amazing hospital. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a place of sadness, it's a place of hope, it's a place of joy.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and the people that work there are bonded together by those things. I think
Mm.
what frustrated me in many ways, and the thing that I love about science is the discipline of the
Mm.
scientific method, observe,
Mm-hmm.
hypothesize, test, and then
Mm-hmm.
right up. But working in medical research, we were working from year to year. You'd get a NH and MRC grant that would be for
Mm-hmm.
12 months. 6 months in, you're
Mm-hmm.
already having to report your findings to
Mm-hmm.
justify getting another year.
Mm.
And that I had a natural style to, let's just say, tell the truth well in the McCann terms. I would often get my papers sent back with, crossed out and say, too many adjectives, stop using
Uh-huh.
these, just state the case. And that frustrated me because, I find myself, I've always felt like I'm a natural communicator. I love
Uh-huh.
talking with people, but
Uh-huh.
that somehow I had to tone it down to fit in
Yeah.
with that sort of publish or perish mentality.
Publish or perish. That's a great way to capture it as well. And it is so fascinating, right? Because um like for me, science, and again, I was one of those people who actually didn't do a science for the HSC. I dropped the science and did all humanities. But that's what I love about this chat, right? Like you
Mm,
need all these different skills. But I'd kind of, think of the sciences as quite black and white, whereas even in science, there's a lot of gray area. And,
absolutely.
and even just, putting together a proposal to get funding. I mean, so much of that is about the cause because there's so many good things that you could do with that money that you have to make a judgment call. It's
Yeah.
not just black and white because there's never enough money and there's all these opportunities, but how do you rank them when they're very different? It's like comparing apples and oranges and bananas and grapes.
Well, look, that's one of the things that when I got into advertising, people would say all the time, oh, it's so different. And I said, there's parts of science that are very
Mm-hmm.
much like being a creative person. And when I
Mm.
say creative, I mean in all aspects, not just
Yeah.
working in a creative department. I did
Mm-hmm.
join advertising as a copywriter,
Mm-hmm.
but I draw a lot of parallels between the first stage of the scientific method and coming up with creative ideas. Because the first
Mm.
one is this immersion in observing the
Yes.
problem, or
Yes.
observing the what's occurring
Yes.
and questioning, asking lots of questions so
Yeah.
that you then create a hypothesis. And it is
Yes.
actually called creating a hypothesis because you
Yeah.
don't actually know. You're making some assumptions, you're
Yeah.
pulling together different ideas and stimulus, that things that have gone before you in thought, and
Mm.
challenging some of those. And I think that process for me was very similar. I didn't find it
Mm.
particularly difficult. And I'm always frustrated when people try and make creativity in the sense of coming up with an idea somehow magical, because
Yeah.
to me it is a process. It's like
Yeah.
immerse yourself in the problem, ask
Yeah.
lots of questions, and then your brain sorts through all that and pops
Yeah.
out with questions. And I think
Yeah.
everyone can do it. It's just
Yeah.
some people feel somehow inhibited or self-judgmental, or someone in the past has said to them, don't try and be creative because you're not a creative type.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true because even in the last probably 5 years or whatever, like I think that with even in the marketing world, as things have gotten faster, and because of that and cost cutting, downsizing, I think some of the discipline of marketing from before that period has been lost because there's so
Oh,
much focus on speed. But, it is so much what you talk about. I mean, it's marketers, we're responsible for understanding the consumer or the customer, whatever you want to call the end user. And the first step is observation. And even like one of the courses I train is design thinking, which
yep,
is very
yep,
much exactly what you've just
exactly.
talked about, which was like, wow, this is so different for marketing. But I'm like, no, actually it's not. It's the principles that exactly you talked about, which is, be curious, empathize, really understand their world, and then define the problem, and then ideate, and then understand how you can best solve the problem through that discipline process. So I love what you're saying because I can see how it totally makes sense.
The one difference I see is the use of research, right? And I think
Mm.
research is really important, obviously in science, but
Mhm.
it's particularly important in marketing. And
Mm.
it's not to actually find the answer, but get you
Mm.
closer to the answer or closer to
Mm.
the question that you're trying to answer. And I
Mm.
think that's often the mistake that happens with research, particularly because
Mm.
we don't live, human beings and the social sciences, as my pure science friend call them, uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Pure science.
yeah, never think of it as being definitive. That
Yeah.
the human existence, to be a Homo sapien,
Uh-huh.
means to be in many ways not defined.
Yes.
That it constantly challenges you, but that doesn't
Yeah.
stop you trying to learn as much about people. And to your
Mm.
point before, I think marketers and the best marketers always have curiosity, and they
Mm.
always have a creative approach.
Mm.
The thing that I find is getting lost is the deep
Mm.
knowledge of all of the tools and all of the
Mm.
philosophies available to you. The number of
Yeah.
people say things like the four Ps are now irrelevant, and I go, no, no, it's a framework that
Uh-huh.
can be still quite useful.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah,
there
I
is
know.
that learning
Agree.
those, and that's one of the things. When I went from science into advertising, I quickly worked out, oh, advertising is just one very small part of the whole marketing mix. And
Uh-huh.
so that natural curiosity and research, I went out to find out as much as I could about this thing called marketing. And the more I learnt, the more I realized there was to learn. And
Yeah,
and also how fascinating it is, because in many
it
ways,
is.
and you've touched on it, marketing is about the study of human beings.
Yeah, it totally is. And, and their behaviors and it's so important, your point around how do you try and create a full picture. I often think about it as a jigsaw puzzle, right? So, when you get the first couple of pieces,
Yep.
you're like, oh, I found the first five that fit together, and you start to see something, but actually you have to add in a lot of pieces. And the more pieces you have, the better you can actually tell what the picture is. And your point around, your human existence, like we're born to grow and change, right? There's all these forces, so it's never a stagnant or absolute thing. It's always evolving, always changing. And you can see that, just even post COVID, well, COVID
Yeah.
in itself, and then post. And, so there's always that need to make sense of, well, who are these people and who are the people who I want to go after because I can best solve their needs, and how do I get them to choose me? So yeah, I totally agree with you. And I love this idea of coming from a science background and then connecting that into um, a discipline which isn't as strongly anchored traditionally in science methodology, even though it's
No.
become more and more moving towards that with neuroscience and behavioral science. So
which
fascinating.
are
So
more which are more branches of psychology than
yes.
they are of
Yeah.
or biological sciences
Yeah.
than they
Yeah.
are the pure sciences. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is the chemistry, the
Yeah.
physics, and the mathematics
Yeah.
is a world that defines itself,
Yes.
whereas the other sciences are working on something. To your point, is the adaptability of humans. There are parts
Yeah.
about the human condition that have not changed potentially in
Yes.
100,000 years. If we could go back and talk to
Yeah.
people, at those
Verify
early
that.
days, coming out of the
Yeah.
grasslands and gnawing on the bones that another animal had killed, it's from
Mm-hmm.
that to the world that we have today. The one thing you have to say about humans is there's a core consistency
Mm.
of, I think Richard Dawkins called it the selfish gene, the
Mm.
self-interest. But
Mm-hmm.
there's also this incredibly powerful adaptability.
Mm.
And then even as you go through life stages, that
Mm.
from childhood of wonder and exploring to
Yeah.
teenage years of rebelling and then maturing and taking on responsibilities, that same individual and
Yeah.
collectively are taking
Yeah.
on new roles throughout life. And because I think life stage is such an interesting way of looking at people
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
goes beyond demographics because you can hit those points at your own time.
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all seen kids that are maturing far too soon because they're exposed to so much
Uh-huh.
online, or
Yes.
young adults that are still acting like teenagers, or
Yeah.
sometimes men in their later years that are still acting like teenagers.
Well,
Um,
I'm very much in the teenage years with my kids.
yeah, exactly.
So I can highly relate to that. But I'm fascinated how you made this leap. So let's go back, if I
Yeah,
may,
sure.
to when you were at the hospital and you were doing all the medical research and testing, etc. Um, what was in your head, or what was that path that took you to becoming a copywriter?
Okay, so my boss, who was terrific, I
Uh-huh.
mentioned her before, Dr. Zena Dennett, kept saying to me, "You need to do a PhD. I'll
Uh-huh.
I'll support you. We'll organise your working arrangements so you could do it part time,
Yeah.
and I'd be looking at 6 to 7 years part time
Yeah.
to cover the PhD course."
Mm.
But I was so acutely aware that I would end up a mile deep expert in a subject that was an inch
Mm.
wide. And that's what I'd
Mm.
noticed about other PhD
Mm.
graduates, doctors, that they were known for their specialty
Yeah.
and they were very deep in that specialty. Whereas my
Mm.
curiosity was much broader than that. And so when I had
Mm.
friends doing a course called Copy School in Melbourne, this is in
Mhm.
the, God, 1980s. Um, that's just aged me, hasn't it? So in the 1980s, it was run by the industry and run by a guy, a creative director called Marcus Tarrant,
Mhm.
who behind his back, everyone would call him Marcus Tyrant because he was
Mhm.
very passionate. And friends had got into this course. They'd advertise each year at the start of the year, and they get hundreds of applicants, and they would
Mm.
take 10 people who would then have 2 nights a week at different agencies working with different creative directors and 2 weekends
Right.
away. And it was designed by the Melbourne advertising industry at the time to bring new talent into the
Mm.
creative departments, which I thought was a terrific idea. I know there's a copy school now that I
Mhm.
think is supported by News Corp. But
Mhm.
this was just run by the industry. So over
Mm.
a 10-month period, you'd go to 10 or 12 agencies. You'd have weeks working with people like Scott Wyburn and John
Mhm.
Turnbull, some John Box,
Amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
at the time, and
Top of their
still
game.
top of
Yeah.
their game. It was money can't buy opportunity. The idea being at the end of it, you would have your own folio. And I
Uh-huh.
said to my friends, typical, big note, I said, oh, advertising would be so easy. And they go, well, you try and get into it next year. So I applied and got in just to prove them wrong. And what I loved about it is I wasn't going to be an inch wide and a mile deep. I was going to be a mile wide and an inch deep. Because what I
Mm.
realized working, they'd give you a brief every Tuesday night, and then Thursday you'd have to come back with ideas.
Mm.
It could be anything from, sanitary napkins to
Mhm.
coffee to,
Mhm.
and that you're working on every week. And so you would have to
Mhm.
very quickly get your head around that category to come back with
Yeah.
ideas. And that's what I did
Yeah.
for that 10 months and ended up with a folio of work that I basically had to hawk around agencies till Michelle Lawrence at Mattingley at the time gave me a job working on Maya of all things. So,
Right.
and that was my first job in advertising.
And so when you were doing the course, were you still working at the hospital at the
Yeah.
time? Okay, so you were kind of, full time at the hospital, part time exploring, and then you obviously made the shift to say, "Oh, I want to give this a go. I want to move into the
Oh,
advertising
absolutely.
industry."
I was hooked,
Yeah.
2 nights a week, Tuesday night, Thursday night from six till 8 or 6 till 9, just talking to these amazing creative people.
Mm,
Uh, the difficulty was my job at the hospital had some real challenges. One of
mm,
them being our laboratory was at the time on the same floor as the mortuary. And one
mm,
of my jobs each day was to go around to the mortuary and collect samples for our research. So we were in the
mm,
Victorian Nerve and Muscle Unit. We were doing research into things like Becker and Duchenne muscular dystrophy,
mm,
RSI, repetition strain injury, anything
mm,
to do with nerves and muscles. We were doing a
mm,
research project on those. We'd go and get cadaver samples on the assumption
mm,
that they would be normal to test against um, the samples that were coming from hospitals and doctors all over Victoria, South Australia, and Tasmania. The That's quite emotionally confronting.
mm,
I wasn't married at the time. I didn't have children, and it was a little bit like that show MASH, in that
mm,
surrounded by that, the first reaction you have is to joke about it or to make, not joke
mm,
about it. There's no joke about a child dying, but
mm.
making light of the circumstances,
Yeah, because it's
right?
so
So
horrible.
confronting, so confronting.
Yeah.
I said to someone in the 5, 6 years, I probably saw about 500 children under 5
Yeah.
in a post-mortem environment, which
Yeah.
is not a great place to be. And eventually it got to the point. I remember one day I Sue Chadwick and Sandy Ledico, two very awarded copywriters. I'd had a particularly bad day emotionally and turned up, and
Mm.
they were doing the sort of bad drill sergeant routine. No one in advertising cares. You've just got to meet the deadline. Because I really didn't, for a number of those reasons, I didn't have what it took. And they were
Mm.
saying, like, if you're working, there's no excuse. They were driving that, which
Yeah.
the irony being that in all of the time I've worked in advertising, it never is that
Yeah.
serious, right? They
Yeah.
were they were dramatizing
Yeah.
to make a point, because largely I found people in advertising agencies are warm and human and
Mm.
empathetic. Well, there's a few egos around, but
Mm-hmm.
largely it attracts people that are very connected and very relationship focused.
Yeah.
Whereas I think science also, they're very warm human beings, but
Yeah.
there can be a more as a collective, more of an analytical approach or more of a
Yeah.
rational approach where emotions are not suppressed, but they're more not as expressed as much as they are in
Yeah.
advertising agencies.
Probably not used as much in the actual work because I come back to the point you were making before around, a lot of marketing is based on psychology, and psychology is about humans, and humans have this rational brain, but they also have all these emotions and all these feelings. And part of understanding consumers in marketing is understanding how they feel. To me, it does make sense that you would attract into that industry people who um, are more interested in the full human experience of both the rational and the emotional side.
Well, I'll give you an example.
Mm.
Like I'm certainly know quite a few uh, profane words or some cursing words, but at the hospital you would never use them, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I found within 6 months of working in an agency, even
Uh-huh.
when you got home, you'd be going, and when you do that in front of your parents, their eyes roll and they go, "Oh
Yeah.
God, what's happened?" He's become this.
My very professional young
Yeah.
son, young man.
So I have to say, my parents were one of the challenges for me.
Mm.
They understood because they were very working class. Dad was a technician with
Hmm.
the PMG and then Telecom and Telstra. He was the same
Hmm.
company for 40 years. And
Hmm.
mum, while she was, largely a stay-at-home mum, had this passion for girl guiding and ended up a state commissioner and getting an Order of Australia for her commitment to guiding.
Oh,
Because she
wow.
had only sons, she had this passion for surrounding herself with young women. But their experience of the world was very had a stereotype. So he works in medical research. He's going to cure cancer. I can be
Uh-huh.
proud of that. Oh, he's
Yeah.
working in advertising. There's a saying in advertising, don't tell your parents you work in advertising. Tell them you play a piano in a whorehouse and they'll feel more comfortable. They actually didn't really understand what I did. And even when I
Mm.
left to start my own business more around procurement and performance and
Mm.
productivity, they still didn't understand it to the point that they
Mm.
could explain it to anyone. I'd have
Yeah.
their friends say, "Oh, you work in advertising," and I go, "That's it." "Oh, what ad have you done recently?" I'm going, "Not for a while." They saw a social drop and
Yeah.
look, also a financial drop. I was a grade one scientist at the Children's Hospital on 42,000. I still remember this. I don't know why. And my
Uh-huh.
first job in advertising full time was 26,000. And my
Yeah.
father was beside himself that you would take such a big pay cut to
Yeah, yeah. Why? Why would you do it? It has, in their eyes, less social esteem and,
exactly,
less money. And where is this going to take you?
exactly.
So you must have really loved loved it to have leant forward with all of those, I guess, those other forces saying, don't do it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I still today, what I love about advertising
Mm,
is the caliber of the people it attracts. And the
mm,
ability for advertising agencies still to create an environment where those
mm,
personalities can thrive. I think
mm,
the downside is they're being used in a more narrow approach.
mm,
And I think that because I was approached by a partner at KPMG, and this is in the early 90s,
mm.
to go and set up, they called it a think tank at
Oh, yes, the
KPMG.
think tanks. I remember the think tanks.
And I said to them, look, they went through the whole idea and how they can do the analysis
Mm,
and get insights, but they can't convert that into ideas because it's just
mm,
not in their culture. And I said, the problem is you've got, 1,000 people that are doing that, and you're going to have a
mm,
think tank of 20 or 30 people. It's like this huge avalanche of culture crushing down on it. I
mm,
said, you'd be better off building relationships with an external party that is then
mm,
incentivized and not directly reporting to you and not
mm,
being sucked into the culture of the organization. And I think we're seeing that, with
mm.
Accenture Song,
Yeah.
particularly, is a good example, but also many of the agencies talk about wanting to move to a consulting business, but I'm not
Mm,
sure the holdcos actually get what that would mean.
mm,
That it is creating a resource that
mm,
marketers can have access to solve
mm.
some of the bigger problems that may even be
Mm,
business problems, or maybe,
yeah.
that it's not just about the promotional P of marketing. It could
Yes.
be product, it could be
Yeah.
pricing, it could be, distribution or place. Um,
Yeah.
that when you create that environment that encourages people, I think that was the other thing I saw is I went from medical science into advertising, and then around the 90s, there were people coming into the agency that left high school and wanted to be a creative person. as
Mm.
if it was a profession. I mean, when we think back to the golden years of the 60s and 70s, I wasn't working then, I was a child, let me say that.
The Mad Men era.
Yeah, but when you read, a lot of those people
Yeah.
came from other businesses. You know, they'd
Yeah.
go off and have a career at something, and then they would get there, largely because they'd be rejected from those organizations because they didn't fit in.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
one of my favorite ads is the Apple, the rounds, the Misfits ad,
Oh yeah, I love those
round peg in the
ads.
square hole.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Because they're the people agencies should be recruiting, or
Yeah.
any business that talks about creativity should be recruiting.
Yes.
But then it's not just enough to recruit them, you need to create the environment that's safe for them, but also
Yes.
challenging them and
Yeah.
keeping them engaged.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Wow. So then began your long, illustrious career in the advertising, communications, marketing industry. And so what was, you're working at agencies, you're a copywriter. How did you then make the jump to your own business, right? Because again, that's another significant jump.
Yeah, yeah. So uh, I came to a realization, Rowena, that I wasn't that good as a creative person. Um, and let me qualify that in that I could come up with ideas, but I wasn't one of those creative people that if a client said, I don't like it, or they had a problem with it, I
Mm,
didn't fight for my work.
right.
And I saw so many people around me that were really passionate about their
Yeah.
ideas and fighting for their work and getting them
Yeah.
through and then getting awards or recognition for getting that idea through.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I've always thought of ideas a bit like the saying, they're a dime a dozen,
Yeah. Yeah.
that an idea is actually worthless until someone's willing to back it
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
make it and put it into the market. You could write the best screenplay, but unless someone's willing to
Yeah.
put the money up to make it, it's worthless.
Yeah. And if someone, unless someone.
Yeah, or
Mhm.
buys it. So
Yeah.
so that's where value comes into it. I think a lot of people think just because they have an idea that somehow there's money in that. And I remember a
Yeah.
conversation with Michael Gudinski at Mushroom, where I was doing a campaign with the Herald Sun and Mushroom. And
Uh-huh.
Michael Gudinski was telling a story about this guy, he calls him my ideas man, who
Uh-huh.
would come to him all the time with ideas. And Michael would go, yeah, yeah, no, go away. Or he'd say, yeah, look, here's 5 grand or 10 grand. Just put it, give it to me and I'll make it happen.
Mm.
And he said, because that was enough to keep the guy interested, but Michael would only take on the jobs that he thought he could turn into, $1 million ideas. And he
Mm.
knew how to do it. And I
Yeah.
think we've got to realize that there's two parts to this. There
Mm.
is the work,
Yeah.
and then there's the value that's realized from the work. I
Yeah.
hear a lot of agencies talking about getting paid for the value. Well, sometimes the value doesn't pay off for
Yeah.
years. It might
Yeah.
be, or licensing ideas that
Yes.
they come up with. Intrinsically, if it's a new idea, it
Yeah.
may not have value that's proven. And so you're
Yeah.
asking people to speculate in the same way as they're
Yeah.
speculating on a startup.
Yeah.
Even worse, it will only become valuable
Uh-huh.
if the market is willing to keep investing in it
Yeah.
year after year, putting money in it and keeping the discipline to
Exactly.
be consistent to it until suddenly it's worth a lot of money
Yeah.
as a
Yeah. As something
brand
that's
asset.
recognizable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as a brand asset. So,
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting conversation or concept that people are trying to put forward
Yeah.
as a way of getting paid other than for the hourly rate, or how many
Yes.
hours did it take to do it? Because I think
Yeah.
that's flawed as well. Some
Yeah.
of my best ideas were I came up with when I was doing something else.
Yes. Well, and that's the neuroscience, right? Like often, when you're relaxed and out or taking a walk, or for
Yeah,
me, I find, if I'm really, when you go on holidays and your brain isn't full, so it's had a chance to relax, that's when my biggest ideas come. and because my brain is relaxed and it's not busy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there are so many interesting elements of creativity because I guess I'm, I philosophically agree with a lot of what you're saying, and this is my opinion around there are a lot of ideas, and the best ideas, I think, are not necessarily new ideas, but they're linked to really understanding where the consumer is today in this moment, and you've got something great to solve it. So it's
Yeah.
it's the insight piece. It's then how the idea brings it to life, not just the words on the briefing document, with the brand
Of
strategy,
course.
but creatively, because I see a lot of that today too, which is a literal interpretation of
Yes, here's
the
the
brief.
idea, or here's the insight. Let's make that the idea. But
Yeah.
but here's the role creativity plays, and I
Mm,
know uh, this is talked about a lot, but the best creative surprises and delights you,
mm-hmm,
but builds on something you can already relate to.
mm-hmm,
Like if it just surprises you and you have no reference point to build on it,
mm-hmm.
it can be quite confronting for someone and they'll
Yeah,
be inclined to. So that's why, it's a bit like education. You build on what's known, but
yeah,
the creative element is finding new connections or new
yeah,
context or new framing
yeah,
for that idea. And
yeah,
some say there are no new ideas, just new perspectives on those
yeah,
ideas. And that's fine as long as you push hard enough to find something that's going to make people go, oh, that's different, or
yeah,
oh, that's new, because that's the first step is to get their
yeah,
attention and then to start to build some sort of memory around it
yeah,
by allowing them to link it to something that they already know. I
yeah,
think it's,
yeah,
but that's not
yeah.
how I got my own business.
Oh yes, we meandered off topic, but
Because
let's go
it
back.
is. I ended up. I, I I I was made redundant in my 15-year advertising career one, two, three times.
Uh-huh.
I'd been made redundant from grey advertising. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I landed back with Michelle Lawrence at J. Walter Thompson in Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we've got lots of global business, but we really struggle with local business, picking
Mm.
up because they see us as big craft Ford at the
Mm.
time. And so my job I was put with an art director, Jim Moody, was to go and help get new business. And we picked up Coles and Blockbuster Video and Blockbuster
Mm-hmm.
Music, which lasted a second. But we were quite successful. And so they gave us the title of creative directors. But
Mm.
I loved new business. And so I
Mm.
said to JWT Melbourne and Sydney, I want to pursue new business. I want to be the new business person. And so they said, sure. It was amazing, Rowena. Picking up a phone and phoning a CMO and going, hi,
Mm.
Darren Woolley, I'm creative director at JWT. Love to come and talk to you about your business because I have a few
Mm-hmm.
thoughts.
Mm.
Every single CMO took the call and I had a meeting. It was like the
Yeah.
door opener. Just saying a
Yeah.
creative director was better
Yes.
than business development director, new
Yeah.
business director. So I was flying Sydney, Melbourne, going and seeing marketers. You should come
Doing
into
what
the
you
agents,
love.
chat, to talking, listening to all of their problems. At
Mm.
the same time, I was also president of the Melbourne Advertising and Design Club. And
Mm.
so I was surrounded by 500 creative people in Melbourne, all saying the same thing. They were saying, why don't marketers really understand what our creativity could do for them? Marketers were telling me the problem I have with my agency, and I thought this was incredibly candid of them, is they give me what they think I want rather than what I need. And
Mm.
I'd say to
Very
them,
interesting.
and I said, well, what do you need? And they go, I want someone to like give me the perspective that I can't see from the inside out. But they're so busy trying to, you know, placate me by just regurgitating things back to me. And I went, well, that's
Mm.
interesting. Here I've got a
Mm.
gap in the marketplace. If there's a gap, there's an opportunity to fill it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't know about pitch consultancy or any of those things. And
Uh-huh.
so out of out of a conversation I had with Reg Bryson, who was at the Campaign Palace at the time.
Uh-huh.
I launched P3, which stood for Helping People Achieve Commercial Purpose Through the Creative Process. It was
Mm.
meant to be an independent third party working with marketers and their agencies
Agencies. Yeah. Mm.
to just facilitate that conversation around creativity, risk, investment, trying to quantify in many ways my science
Yeah.
background desire for quantification in a
Uh-huh.
field where everyone would tell me you can't quantify this stuff. Well, you can because it's a process. It has some
Uh-huh.
undefinable, well, difficult to define areas, but everything around
Yes.
it is quite definable. So let's start
Yeah.
there and work from there. So that was P3. By 5 years down the track, there was this
Uh-huh.
third party creeping into all the relationships. Can you guess what it was? So it
It's
was marketers and agencies.
procurement.
Yep, procurement. So then it became
Uh,
Trinity
uh-huh.
P3, the Trinity being the unholy trinity of marketers, agencies, and procurement. That was my unholy trinity that that we became known for. And it's
Uh,
stayed the same since. We're still
yeah.
working with procurement, we're still working with marketers, and we're still
Yeah.
working with agencies.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, that's great. Because you when you explain the whole story, it totally makes sense, you know?
Yeah,
And, and that's the beautiful thing I think about careers is they're based around the person and that it's as a decision of that person whether they take a leap or not. Because you could have stayed in medical science and you could have had, I'm sure, a very successful career in medical science. But it wasn't necessarily your passion,
no,
because you didn't want that specialist depth. You wanted that breadth. And so then you ended up in this very different world. But what you've been able to bring into it is very much linked to, a lot of your history. And
yeah,
I think that's the thing that people don't always realize. It doesn't have to be the average linear sequential tick, 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 tick. There is so much need for diversity of skill set, and the ability to fuse elements together in new ways. And that's where the magic lies, right? I mean,
absolutely.
that's the gold in the seams.
Yep. And it takes a couple of things. One is uh, be constantly curious.
Mm,
Okay. What else is out there? Jerry
mm,
Seinfeld says, men aren't saying what's on TV. They're asking what else is on TV? What else is
yeah,
there?
yeah,
When they're just flicking channels. And
yeah.
it is that curiosity, I think, in everyone. The other is, don't make rash decisions, but be willing to back yourself. Don't rush
Mm,
into things. But none of those decisions were made on the spur of a moment.
yeah,
I did copy school, and I had 10 months, and then I spent
yeah,
6 months looking for a job. So it wasn't like it happened overnight.
yeah,
And
yeah.
even my own business, it was literally that 2 years of doing new business that this
Yes,
idea evolved. So
yes.
that the day that Michelle came in and said, we're having to make you redundant for cost cutting purposes, I was like, right, well,
I'm
here's the,
ready.
here's the chance. And, that redundancy payment will help fund the
Launch
first
my
six
new
months of the
business.
business. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think a little bit of that is the more you prepare,
Mm,
the better you get, or the better prepared that you are, the
mm,
more opportunities present themselves. One of
yeah.
the things, like I've now been doing this for 25 years, so it's the
Uh-huh.
longest. I used to mock my father working 40 odd years for the one place. I'm working 25 years for the one place. But one of the disciplines that I introduced very early on is every year we have an offsite where we look at where are we at now,
Uh-huh.
why are we there, where do we want to be, and how do
Uh-huh.
we get there? So we pull the whole thing apart and reassemble it, looking
Yeah.
for what has changed. Because one of the great things
Yeah.
about marketing, media, technology,
Uh-huh.
advertising, is we're living in the most
Oh yeah.
dynamic time ever in marketing.
Yep.
You touched on it before. Things are changing so quickly.
Uh-huh.
Consumers are adapting to those changes.
Uh-huh.
Marketers are being forced to not just do more with the same budget or sometimes less, but need to experiment as well because
Yeah.
there's less and less certainty. We live in a
Yeah.
time where everything's uncertain, and we have
Yeah.
to be prepared for that, and we have to get management of our organizations to understand,
Yes.
that on a board level, I cannot give you certainty. Okay.
No.
I can
No.
give you a best outcome, a
Yeah.
worst outcome, and a possible outcome.
Uh-huh.
No amount of having your graduate of the Institute of Company Directors uh,
Yeah.
title is going to change that, you know?
No, because it's the future and it's evolving and changing. And so there's variables which are not fully known. I
That's right.
mean, I was talking to Louise Cummins yesterday, just about AI, and obviously that's so topical, but we're still at the earliest of stages and we don't really know. No one really knows how it's going to manifest. And if I think back to digital, way back when it was dial up, that funny noise it made. Yeah, that one. And it hardly ever connected, right? If it
Yeah.
connected, you were cheering, right? Absolutely
Yeah.
cheering. But then it evolved into websites. And at the time, everyone's like, oh, okay, so this is digital, it's email and websites. And then obviously shifted massively with social media. And then it shifted again with
Yeah.
all of the infrastructure with data. And now it's like completely created this infrastructure for AI just to go like that,
Yeah.
because everything's in place. So we've got the cloud and we've got the data and we've got everything for it to take off, but we don't know what it's going to look like. And with that, I think you do need curiosity and courage and commitment, like your point on backing yourself. It's it's a crazy world. No one knows what's going to happen, but you do have a choice around what actions you take.
Yeah.
And no one's saying to be stupid and just, put your family under extra
No,
stress by throwing out your job
no,
and
no.
looking, but figure out what you want. And I do think the point you're making around experimentation, like think about that with your career.
Yep.
Because, if you'd never got, done that course, the night school copy course, that would never have led you into the industry, which would never have led you into the business development job, which would never have led
Yep.
you to your business. And I think, they're the steps that create completely new paths. But if you don't take that first step,
That's
you're
right.
still on the known paths,
Yeah.
and you'll never really fully understand what could be. So I love your story about,
Thank you.
how it all happened and evolved. And what do your parents think now that you're been in the business for 25 years?
Well, they've both passed away, so I think they both passed away still not knowing what I do, but they see provide for my family, and yeah,
Yeah.
so and I seem reasonably happy doing it. And look, I have
Yeah.
to say, it is like any business, it has its ups and downs, but
Yeah.
generally there's a genuine joy that I
Yeah.
get from working with my team. I've got built a big team of, we've
Uh-huh.
created this cohort of like-minded, curious,
Uh-huh.
beings. They
Uh-huh.
can be challenging sometimes, which is what I want.
Yeah.
But also with our clients and also agencies. I think
Yeah.
sometimes because we pop in and out of relationships,
Uh-huh.
unlike an agency, people sometimes don't really get to see us in full. But
Yeah.
we're as proud of a relationship that comes out of a
Mm.
tender that lasted 20 years, like WPP and Suncorp. Which
Uh-huh.
only that was a relationship that we started back in 2004
Yeah.
with George Patswiner winning the Suncorp pitch. So, that
Yeah.
gives us as much pleasure and joy and reward, even though we're not in it day to day. And I think,
Yeah.
it's finding those things, finding the
Yeah.
things that you've contributed to the industry and hopefully made it a better industry.
Yeah, and I think also finding your superpower, like you don't really know until you try things. So I remember, for the first, I can't remember how many years exactly, but probably 15 years or so, I was always in a commercial line job. So
Yeah,
in marketing companies, and then, I was a marketing director. And my husband David's job took us to Singapore, and I was working with J&J in Sydney as the marketing director. But his job, and we decided to move for his job.
yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay. So I guess I'm going to have to do one of those regional jobs because they were the only jobs up there if I stayed with J&J. And J.
Yep.
And I remember I had this perception of, oh no, you don't want to do regional jobs. Like they're those hated people who fly in and like create all this work and don't add any value. Anyway, I was convinced that I'd hate it. Convinced. Anyway, but I took the job
Yep.
because, I love the company and I'm like, yeah, this is good to have a job when I arrive. Anyway, the irony of it was I loved the job so much. And so I thought I wouldn't, but I'm like, no, I love this job. It's an influence job and you can add value, but you need to understand what they need and how to be collaborative, not a judge, judge
Yes.
and jury that comes down and says that's crap. And it was, oh, I remember the ultimate test of value at J&J at the time was, will they pay for your airfares? Because
Right.
invariably the budgets ran out middle of the year, right? So there was 6 months of everyone traveling and then 6 months of budgets are gone, budgets are cut, no traveling, you'll just have to do telecons at the time. And I remember if people paid for your airfare and your travel expenses because it all got cross-charged,
Yep.
then you're like,
That's
I am adding, like they're
good
choosing
advice.
to bring me over rather than do stuff themselves.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah.
you absolutely hit the nail on the head because most people don't understand regional and global roles.
Uh-huh.
You think you have authority, you have no authority.
You have no
You,
authority.
and so it relies so heavily on your ability to influence and collaborate, to
Uh-huh.
really listen. And the
Uh-huh.
best people in those roles have that, all of the things you were talking about before, the
Yeah.
empathy, the
Yeah.
warmth, the understanding, but they
Yeah.
also very quickly establish their credentials of,
Uh-huh.
knowing or experiencing more than the person they're talking to and
Uh-huh.
having that person being open to it, in many
Yeah.
ways like being a coach,
Yes.
rather
Yes.
than a boss.
Yes. And very much similar, the skill set from that regional role
Yeah,
is actually closest to being a consultant.
yeah,
Because you
true.
don't have look, you don't have authority.
No,
But you've got a genuine desire to help. And it's about, okay, that value creation. So it was so funny, but I was absolutely convinced that I would hate it. I wanted to own the P&L and I wanted to keep my team and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, huh, little did I know myself.
and what I love about that, Rowena, is your personal KPIs changed
Uh-huh.
from the tangible uh, performance
Uh-huh.
to a soft measure. And people often, I hate it when they poo-poo soft measures
Uh-huh.
because they're often the most insightful. But
Uh-huh.
to have someone pay for you to fly is your KPI.
Oh, absolutely. And the greatest indicator of value.
Yeah, yeah. So and imagine also building those relationships that then go
Mhm.
on for a long time after you're no longer in that role. Because
Yeah, absolutely.
when you're telling someone what to do, and this is why if anyone calls me boss, I go, I'm not the boss of you. You
Uh-huh.
know, that this is we work together, right?
Uh-huh.
Is my
Uh-huh.
the way I frame this,
Yeah.
and I said because if I tell you what to do, you can only be as good as I tell you.
Yeah.
Whereas if I
Yes.
work with you and listen to what you have
Yes.
and what your ideas are, then together we could create something better. And that's what
Exactly.
we've done. All of our IP within the business has come
Yeah.
from collaborating with that range of people that I've worked with over the last 25 years.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
brilliant. And it's the skill set that is going to unlock value, particularly in the world of AI, I think. So
Yeah,
it's those collaboration skills because it's too complex. No one has the answers end to end. But also it's going to be around collaborations. Like it was ironic that I saw yesterday that Microsoft have now brought ChatGPT into the Copilot. I'm like,
yeah,
there you go.
yeah,
So it's going to be about partnerships and it's going to be about collaboration and it's going to be about co-creation because if you control everything, you're going to miss out because things are happening so fast around you. And the
of course.
opportunity is that breadth you were talking about.
Yeah,
How do you create something that's amazing from pieces that can now come together that previously weren't able to?
yeah,
So
exactly.
anyway, I've got a couple of questions for you
Sure.
to wrap up our chat. So the first one, what are three things you've learned about yourself in recent years?
Well, the first one is I certainly don't like feeling like I have to control things. When I
Mm,
was younger, I felt this sense that I had to be across everything.
mm,
But yeah, in recent years, I've learnt much more to let go and but just be more there for people when they want help rather than being
mm,
across it. And I'm
mm,
not even talking about micromanaging. The second one is, and I've always been a good conversationalist, but I
mm-hmm,
find myself listening even more and
mm,
trying to talk less because I the things that I'm still learning. My 8-year-old said this morning, I know everything about this year's classes. And I said, then you've stopped living. And he goes, what do you
yeah,
mean? And I said, well, you stop listening, stop learning, stop living.
yeah,
You've got to
yeah,
keep going.
yeah,
And then the third thing is that self-care is
mm,
so important. When I was creative director, I was working 70-hour weeks. I'd often
mm,
feel like I'd go to work on a Monday and get home Friday night, emotionally
mm.
and psychologically. I was in those days, I've always had a trouble with weight. But the last few years I've been focusing on living healthier, living longer. I
Mm.
guess having 8-year-olds at my age wants me to live longer.
Yes, there's a big reason why you
Yeah,
want to live longer, and now we know so much more too about longevity.
exactly.
So it's like, yep, these changes are required.
Exactly.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, next question. What is important to you at the moment in your life?
I know it's a cliche, it's family. It's
Mm,
I have 5 children, two different families, uh,
mm,
and those connections and watching the older, my 3 daughters making their way, they're all working and in
mm.
careers, and just watching that. I try not to give advice unless it's asked for, but and with the my two twin boys, just really guiding them. Um, I in terms of gender equality,
Uh-huh.
my
Uh-huh.
mother used to say men and women are equal but different.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to engender in the boys is an
Yes.
appreciation of that, that it's okay to be a man, but that doesn't mean toxic masculinity. That means
Yeah.
being someone that's reliable as a person of their word,
Yeah.
and being someone that others can rely on.
Yeah. Oh, that's really beautiful. And that would be so rewarding too to see, your daughters who are older figuring out their lives.
Yeah,
And then you've got these two beautiful boys who are still at those really early ages in
yeah.
this, growing up in this kind of crazy world that didn't exist when we were teenagers.
Yeah, and navigating that, I think, being a
Yeah.
parent today is much harder than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. I think there's very different dangers, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, more complex. It's
More
not harder,
complex.
it's more
Yes,
complex. You're
definitely.
dealing with a lot more issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, last question. What is a current fear, a current inspiration and a current challenge for you at the moment. So there's fear, inspiration, and challenge.
Okay. My current fear is being irrelevant or
Mm,
becoming irrelevant. Um, and part of that is AI. You know, I'm reading all of the big
mm,
consulting firms saying AI could be an existential crisis for consultants. But
mm,
the inspiration is also the same thing. It's AI
mm,
because
mm,
we're going through a process of completely rethinking the business at the moment and
mm,
how to, where can we build AI in and where can we embrace the changes that are happening so that we can actually act as an advisor
mm.
without actually telling people what to do, you know,
Yeah.
and what was the third one?
Challenge.
Oh, the challenge. Um, Having enough time in the day. Why is that all? That's always been
It's
the
always the
challenge. Yeah.
case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That every time I get to the end of the day and think I've done my to-do list, I remember that there was the to-do list from the day before that I didn't finish and the one before that. So yeah, it's having enough time in the day to do all the things that are important to me. You know,
Yeah.
I, I, I've learned, you know, be true to your values,
Yeah.
but don't lock yourself into your decisions.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference there for me because people often ask you to make a decision about something and you'll
Mm,
make the decision in that moment.
mm.
But you should never lock yourself into that if there's a better reason. As long as you're constantly true to the values that you
Yeah.
hold dear, then
Yeah.
I think you have integrity.
Yeah.
But if locking yourself in a world that's constantly changing and challenging,
Yeah.
that means, you know, keeping yourself flexible in some ways, but not in a way
Yeah.
that leaves people exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. With my work on uncomfortable growth, I always talk about how when you change, your decisions can change.
Yes.
But again, using your values to guide what's the right decision for you now. And just because that was the right decision a few years ago,
Yeah.
doesn't mean it still is. It could be, but it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And so, yes, it's that. Um, I think it's that reflection and looking at where am I at now and what are the right choices moving forward. Like your offsite you do every year,
Yeah.
where
That's
you
right.
break it down and rebuild it. It's like, are these our choices for the next 12 months? Some of them may
Yeah.
change.
And look, there's some years where it's massive change and other years it's just tweaking, you know, and be
Yeah.
willing. None of that is right or wrong. It just is
Yes.
what it is. You know,
Yeah.
and you need to do that. You know, survival of the most adaptable
Yeah.
is survival of the fittest. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important for people to remember because it's natural as you get older to want to mitigate or minimize risk.
Yeah.
I think that era is gone
Yes.
because there is so much opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you get into that risk mitigation all the time, you're actually limiting the
Yeah.
possibility. You
Yeah.
need to expand it.
Yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful chat. Thank you so much for coming on Uncomfortable Growth Uncut, Darren.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I can see why you're such a highly regarded mentor and coach. You know, you
Oh,
just
thank
have that
you.
ability to draw from me the stories that I've held dear for a long time.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing your story. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
If you are inspired but thinking, I can't do that, then you are so wrong. Anyone can learn the art of uncomfortable growth with the help of my flagship program, Uncomfortable Growth, Own Your Reinvention. In this, you will learn to navigate your own internal contradictions to finally unlock the courage and commitment to live a deeply meaningful life by design and on your terms. Uncomfortable growth is about the struggle and joy in discovering who you are, what you truly want, and how to make it happen. If this is something you are ready for, then find out more at www.rowenamillward.com. What have you got to lose, or more importantly, gain?